Welcome to the Sorch podcast, where we explore Sikh and wider South Asian history, art and philosophy with historians, artists and researchers. Today I'm going to get the chance to put forward your questions and the most common critiques of Sri Dasam Granth to Dr. Kamalroop Singh, who has completed a PhD at the University of Birmingham, School of Philosophy, Theology and Religions. His thesis was titled Dasam Granth Re-examined. In addition, he has published 2 books on Sri Dasam Granth Sahib, questions and answers, as well as the Granth of Guru Gobind Singh Ji essays, lectures and translations. Now, before we get started, let me say thank you for joining and taking part in this podcast. I know I've already given you an introduction, but I think it would also help if you were to introduce yourself.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So, Ramblings of a Sikh, I feel very honoured that for your podcast, you've called little old me to share about Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. And so, regarding the Sri Dasam Granth Sahib, I'm a student of Guru Gobind Singh's Bani. And obviously, Dasam Granth Sahib is one of the scriptures that Guru Maharaj wrote. And I was lucky enough to study the Dasam Granth Sahib or research the Dasam Granth Sahib at Birmingham University after doing my MPhil in Sikh studies and research methodology. Then I went on to study the Dasam Granth, and I did my course 6 years part-time, and I achieved the PhD in the subject. That was at the School of History, Philosophy and Religion. And after that, what was left in my appendices with Gurinder Singh Mann from Leicester and not of Santa Barbara, California, we collated a book together. They were different essays, and really it was quite a big job to put them into a coherent book. And we both managed it. And then we also wrote, I think in 2011, we did Dasam Granth questions and answers. Yeah, so in the process of kind of doing this research, I ended up staying with a lot of different traditional groups or sampradaya in India, including the Nirmale, the Adasi, Seva Panthis, the Taksal, and even the SGPC, others, even though they're not a sampradaya, but they're a modern movement. And obviously the Nihang Singhs, who I kind of trained with, lived with. And I had teachers, Baba Sajit Singh, who sadly passed away, and Baba Santa Singh, who helped guide me in my research, particularly where manuscripts and original sources were.
Just going back a little bit then, I just want to get an idea of how, like, before you ended up doing the PhD, before you ended up getting to university and doing all of that, and then obviously writing the books with Gurinder Singh Mann, etc., how did you get into Sikhi, and then how did you get into that particular field? Like, what led you to that?
Well, I think, ultimately it's Waheguru's hukum, destiny, the hukum's written with us, says Guru Nanak, in Japji Sahib. So it was just the way it was meant to be. But there are some kind of things on that journey that I can point out that definitely shaped that. One was the influence of my Dadi Ji, my Bibi, my dad's mother. And she's a very spiritual person, and she was a student of Baba Isha Singh. And I'm summing it up. There's a lot to be said, and I'm really summing up fast. But she was very mystical, and she did a lot of bhakti, was a very impressive person of principle and love, and that was obviously pointed us all in the right direction. So with her blessings, that spirit, there's kind of that spiritual awakening or spiritual thirst, you can say, within inside your heart. And I went away for Sikhi for a while when I was about 14, 15, having that rational kind of deconstructive scientific mindset. I used to say to her, what's the point of Gish? What's Gish going to give me in the modern world? So I had that clash of identities that many of us go through. And she tried to explain to me the best she could, but obviously her worldview and my worldview were different completely, although I connected to her from my heart. So she could never explain to me, so I cut my kish. So between about 15 and 19, I didn't have Gish. And then, the kind of in a spiritual sense, you say your energy changed or my vibe changed. And I was happy for a while with this kind of new identity. And so I kind of thought, well, I'm still a even though I cut my hair. Hasn't really changed much for me, But that was the kind of the rude awakening, but it didn't make me see it in a spiritual way. And then I started to get sick, a bit dismayed with, I wouldn't say life, but the society we live in and how things are. I got very sick and I nearly died. And I kind of had like NDE or some kind of like awakening or some kind of kick up the arse, I'd call it. And that made me see the world in a different way, that after I came out of this experience, I didn't see the physical world as physical anymore. I saw it that there was something beyond that which was more true and more divine and more real than what we perceive with our eyes, what we call Maya. And then that really challenged everything that I thought that I knew. And so I had to search. So I started reading books in the library, spiritual books, talk to my Bibi, try and make sense. And trying to, figure out things. And I've always been a little bit academic minded. And I just read what I could. And then I just started to get a thirst for kind of, what happened to Maharaj Dalip Singh, who was Hugh MacLeod writing all these books on Sikhism when, he's an ex-priest. I became inquisitive, and then I kind of read through all of the Sikhi books in the library, probably by the time I was about 15. And I'd just sit there meticulously going through. And it was actually then that I realized there was another Granth. So I was about 15, 16, and I was like, what is this Granth, this Dasam Granth? And there's another one, Sarbalo Granth. Then I never really thought about it, ended up at university. And before I went to uni, I did a ardas to Maharaj. I said, Maharaj, you know what? Wouldn't it be nice? Because I was going to this unknown experience and I was already dismayed with things to a certain level, and I'd just come out of this, and luckily with my life. And the second person I met was an Amritdhari Singh, and he was from the Nanak and Skam Seva Jatha. And I don't agree with everything that, they say. Every group's got their own flavor. But, he's a man of principle, of dharam, of naam, of bhakti. And that was a, good influence to put me back into the right direction and kind of look. There's also another Singh from the Akhand Kirtan Jatha who was really inspiring. The other Singh's name was Sukhpal Singh, and this Singh's well-known name, Jagjit Singh. And also he's very charismatic, and he kind of put us on a good path, on a noble path. And so, there were these influences early on of these different Singhs and the opposing views they'd have. And, they'd debate, and I found that very interesting. I want to know more. And then they talk to me a little bit, this is Dasam Granth, or this is the Sarbalo Granth. And, little bits. They wouldn't go too much into it, but they would, And then I was meant to, one of my cousins, he did pharmacy, and my dad's cousin brothers, they did pharmacy. So, natural family trade is become a pharmacist, and you're set for life. But I got onto pharmaceutical science, and I could have done pharmacy. Then I did that. Then I did chemistry. I was offered a really good job in America. Then I turned it down because I was in the Gurdwara gym. And when I looked up, it said Sikh Studies, Birmingham Uni. And I thought, they're not going to let me in because I've got a science background. So I just wrote a proposal, and I wrote, there's a secondary Granth called Dasam Granth. And actually, many people don't realize there's a handful of other compositions that are in there that have been excised, that have been removed in the editing process. And I'd like to do a PhD on Dasam Granth and focus on the manuscripts and that. And that's actually really specific.
Sorry, just to quickly paraphrase, are you saying that you literally went from your science degree and were just like, on a whim, I'm just going to do this PhD?
It wasn't planned out. I mean, during my chemistry degree, I was going to Holy Bones Library in Leicester, and I'd go to the Gurdwara and I would look at all the books. And one of the first books I looked at was the Dasam Granth, and it was the Tika by Randhir Singh, not by Randhir Singh, but Randhir Singh scholar. And it was published by the university in Patiala. So I was really got interested in Dasam Granth, and I read all the entries in Mahan Kosh, and I looked through it meticulously, trying to find out anything that I could. And then one day I was in the gym, looked up and just saw this poster. And so then I put this proposal through, and they accepted it, and I got through the MPhil. I told the lecturers exactly what I wanted to do. And and then I went on to study that with Guru Maharaj's grace.
Yeah, well, I think we met you as a family, I think, whilst you were doing your PhD. And I have to admit, actually, I think you were probably one of the most influential people in me getting involved in key full stop, let alone kind of the history side of things. Just a question though that relates to your stories. It was sent in by a member of the community, and basically they were asking, why do you think that a lot of people who grow up in a Sikh family learn about the Dasam Granth quite late on in life? For instance, you were 15 or so and you happen to have read a book that kind of hinted to it. I know things are perhaps a little bit different now because people like yourself have actually done the work and the research and brought it out. But just before we go into Dasam Granth in more depth, why do you think that the community as a whole come to learn of it a lot later on in life? Like, for argument's sake, we learn about the 10 Gurus' names and the Guru Granth Sahib Ji and the Panch Pyare when we're kind of like little kids. Why do you think that's not necessarily the same with Dasam Granth?
Well, the simple answer there, Amar Singh, is the scripture of the Guru Gobind Singh has been deliberately obscured.
I was expecting that response, to be honest. And actually that kind of nicely leads us into Dasam Granth discussion quite nicely. So just to start with, then, this is just an extract that I had found from an old newspaper, Saturday, the 4th of April, 1846, Illustrated London News. Guru Gobind inculcated his tenets upon his followers by his preaching, his actions, and his works. Among the latter is Dasama Padshah Ka Granth, or Book of the 10th King. He being the 10th ruler from Nanak, the founder of the religion. This work, together with the Adi Granth of Nanak, the only other sacred book, is held in great veneration by the Sikhs. So that is obvious, and I'm sure you've seen plenty more examples in your research, that is pretty clear, the status of Dasam Granth within Sikhi, full stop, at that point in time. Two things that I guess we're going to concentrate on in particular in this conversation are authenticity and authorship. And that, I think, is just because they're both related, in that the argument related to authorship is intrinsically related to authenticity, i.e. if it's not written by Guru Gobind Singh Ji, it is not authentic. So just to start with then, can you explain what Dasam Granth is, just in a couple of sentences? Obviously, we're going to go into how we get to the modern Dasam Granth, be it as it is. But what is Dasam Granth for those who have never heard of it before?
The Dasam Granth is the scripture of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. It's a martial scripture. Its leitmotif is war, or Dharam Yudh, righteous war. And the Guru draws on the mythology of India, which was familiar to the common man, to inspire them to fight against injustice. He also includes his own battles. In the Apani Katha of Bachitra Natak, there's also devotional sections, political sections, and pretty much that sums up the Dasam Granth. And obviously the controversial section where Chaupai Sahib comes from, the Charitropakhyan, which deals with kind of mostly sexual stories of men and women.
Okay, yeah. Well, we're going to get into that in a lot more detail a little bit further on. I just then wanted to ask, so to be honest, you've already given the answer because you've stated numerous times that Dasam Granth is Guru Gobind Singh Ji's writing. So a lot of people actually, when I put the post out on Instagram for people to send in their questions, a lot of people were asking, is it actually the writing of Guru Gobind Singh Ji? Could it have included composition of court poets? And if it is the work of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, how is that authenticated? Like, are there signatures? Are there authentic manuscripts? Like, what is the evidence, so to speak?
That's a really good question. And, we should be rational and be critical about any source that we look at. So if we're going to look historically, which is the right method, how do we trace the Dasam Granth back? We'd have to look at the lineage of manuscripts. And that would mean nowadays, how is the modern printed Dasam Granth, or the Jab Sahib that's in your Ghatka, the second Bani of Nityanem, or the Chaupai Sahib, or the Swaya, how is that Ghatka got to you? Because it didn't appear from nowhere, So you have to look back that lineage, and they call that, well, obviously the printed Swaroop's 1898, around that time. So we know there's a printed Swaroop up to now where we get our liturgy from. So up to 1898, what manuscripts were used to make that Swaroop? And then can we trace those Swaroops back to Guru Gobind Singh's time? And can we even confirm that these Bani are historically in Sikh traditions, written traditions, oral traditions, and praxis in religious rites? Has this Bani been used? And actually you can confirm all of that with history and with sources in Sikh history, manuscripts, the Guru's own pens, at like Paonta Sahib. There's even a handwritten panna with the Sodhi family in Nandpur Sahib of Jab Sahib. There's handwritten pages in the Chaupai Sahib, and so on and so forth. So you can authenticate the scripture all the way back to Guru Gobind Singh's time, and from his own kalam, from his own hand.
What is the earliest manuscript of Dasam Granth that you've come across?
The earliest manuscript I've come across is from 1688, and that's the date where Krishna Avatar finishes, and that Pothi is only up to Krishna Avatar. So when we read Sikh history, like the Chaupa Singh Rehatnama, Bansavali Nama, Kesar Singh Chibber, and they're both 18th century texts, one from very early on, probably from Guru Gobind Singh's Darbar, maybe even going into the 17th century, and Bansavali Nama is also very early on. So then when we look at both texts, we find out that Guru Gobind Singh, he wrote the Jab Sahib, the Kal Ustad, the Swaye, and Pachitta Natak. That's what is noted in history. And that particular breviary or liturgical text, it has the Bani in that order with a date. And there's a date in the colophon of Krishna Avatar. The Guru poetically gives a date, but this Pothi also gives that same date at the beginning. So it confirms it even more and its style and everything. So that was one of the earliest sources. And then there's the Anandpuri Sarup from 1696, when the Chaupai Sahib, the Charitropakhyan was completed. So that's another point where the Pothi at that time becomes a Granth. So it grew over time, just like, the Guru Granth Sahib grew. As the Gurus wrote more Bani, and they included Pakistani Bani, the Guru Granth Sahib flowered into what it is, into the light that is given today. And in the same way as Guru Gobind Singh meditated on his Dharam Yudh, his liturgy for Khalsa Raj, for how Sikhs could be complete sovereigns on this earth, flowered also. And so he added to it bit by bit to inspire people, and eventually it became a Granth. So also these two early sources. Then there's the Srup by Bhai Mani Singh from 1713. And it has both Ard and Dasam Granth Sahib in there. And then there's the Srup by Baba Deep Singh at Damdama Sahib. It also has most of the Bani of Dasam Granth. Then there's the Bhai Daya Singh Srup at Aurangabad. And really the list goes on. I don't know where to stop. The evidence is so much. Even at Anandpur Sahib, Keshkar Sahib, where Guru Maharaj's holy Shastra, Jitte Shastra Namang Namaskar Tamang, Jitte Astar Paying Namaskar Tayang. Maharaj says, I bow down to where the names of weapons are. That's why the weapons always Parkash in the center. And Parkash there also is a Pothi, which was given by a Sikh royal family to the Takht recently. And in there's Charitropakhyan in Guru Gobind Singh's handwriting in a smaller text. So, yeah, there's so much evidence. I mean, where do you start? It's a treasure trove with Dasam Granth. It's lives amount of work. Nobody can do it in their life. Guru Gobind Singh did an absolute miracle beyond miracles with the corpus of ideas, text, mantar, part, Bani, Shakti, political, military strategy he gave us. We should delve in there and look at this text. It's a classical text. If we look in England, when people go into the military or they become a general or they become in the MI5, MI6, they have to have done classics. What are classics? Like Greek classic, Roman classics, mythology. They have to have learnt that. Guru Gobind Singh gave us that because we're the same. We have to do Raj on this planet. That Raj Grega Khalsa Akire Nako. Khalsa will do Raj, and Dasam Granth Sahib is how we do Raj, and that's why it's always been attacked.
No, but this is the reason why I have you on this podcast discussing this topic. The list of evidence is clear. Like, you list a lot of it in your Q&A book. There was one thing that I just wanted to touch upon, which is traditional argument is that because the compositions within a lot of the old manuscripts don't match up or are in different orders or whatever, therefore that somehow does a negative on the authenticity of it being the work of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. Would you say to people who've used that argument?
Well, let's look at it theologically. What is Bani? Is Bani something just spoken by the Guru? Let's look at Guru Granth Sahib Maharaj, who is our Guru. And if we look at our Guru, there's words, there's scripture of Sheikh Farid Ji, a Sufi, of Bhagat Kabir Ji, Bhagat Namdev, and then also the part. So the Guru's Bani doesn't necessarily, the Guru isn't saying what I say is just Gurbani. What all those great beings have written is also Gurbani. So let's say there is court poet material in the Dasam Granth. Let's say, for argument's sake, which isn't the case. Let's say Ram and Shyam, these two pen names, are these two celebrated poets that made Sikhs write their scripture for hundreds and hundreds of years and even print the scripture, which is in Nahangdals. Then they should be celebrated because they're great people, they're great poets, they're great masters. But that's not the case. You know, the pen names that Guru Gobind Singh employed are for himself, they're his sharp. They're his pen name. In Brij Pasha poetry, you had a pen name which was not your name. And there's even a book at SOAS, the School of African and Asian Studies, of pen names of Hindi Brij Pasha poets. Like someone calls himself Balab, someone calls himself Shan. Guru Gobind Singh gave himself some pen name. So in history, we don't know nothing about this Ram and Shyam because there is no Ram and Shyam. Ram and Shyam is Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj. And when we look at the manuscript evidence, we can see that Guru Gobind Singh, let's look at the Akal Takht Bani, Uttar Khase Daskhat Ka. This is now the signature of the author. Guru Gobind Singh starts Pashahi Dasmi. Like I've already said, Jab Sahib, the first initial pages in Guru Gobind Singh's hands, then the scribes would take over. So those nishans, those signature pages, Guru would write. So we know scribes were writing Guru's Bani, but Shyam, Ram, and Guru's signing their Bani off doesn't make any logical sense even with Sikh history, because Ram and Shyam, they're not mentioned. No one said Ram wrote Charitropakhyan and Shyam wrote Krishna Avatar. None of the 18th century, 19th century great Sikh scholars and shaheeds wrote that. So then why do we want to assume that? So people misquote texts and they do all types of things to create this kind of illusion or smokescreen about that there's some issue here. But when we go into this issue of authorship, it's not even a Sikh who says that. It's not a Sikh who says this isn't Guru's Bani. It's Cunningham. In 1849, he says, well, Ram and Shyam are the poets. But no Sikh scholars ever said that. And no British or European scholar before Cunningham ever said that. And lo and behold, who is Cunningham? Look at the name. It gives it away. He's an intelligence officer who's on the border to invade Punjab. And later on, he gets a position. So this is a typical divide and rule because the British researched the Dasam Granth. They know it's where we get our political maxims from. And so they didn't want it to be in the corpus of Sikh liturgy. They wanted to pacify us. And to a certain extent, unfortunately, they have succeeded.
So just to paraphrase what you're saying, would you argue that the process of colonization, quote unquote, left us without Dasam Granth in the modern world? Like, to put it like really simply, I know obviously it's far more complicated than that.
The British colonialism disarmed us of both the Shabad and the Shastra. So that includes the Dasam Granth and Shastra Parkash and Shastra Puja and Shastra Vidya and having a standing army, etc.
Just one more thing then that gets brought up is that the different manuscripts, and the very early manuscripts, for argument's sake, the Anandpur Bead and the Bhai Mani Singh Bead, the people argue that there are differences in the actual content of those different manuscripts, i.e. there's no uniformity between them. I understand obviously there are pre-modern techniques of printing which would have obviously affected them being uniform, but just putting that to a side, what would you say to people who would argue that because there's a difference in very early manuscripts, certain Bani aren't in the same order or certain Bani aren't included in some of the manuscripts?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the thing is, if you look at the modern printed Swarup of Dasam Granth Sahib, is based on a particular version, which was like the second version, first or second version. And that version, the prachar of it was done more before Guru Gobind Singh entered a period of a great amount of warfare. So the prachar of that particular recension or particular edition was done more. And then the Swarups with the extra Bani, obviously in chronology, they were written later on. So they were probably written after 1696. And they were probably completed around 1698 and after. And then they had Vaddu Baniya, extra Baniya, like Sansar Sukhmana, Malkonski Var, Pagoti Stotar in Krishna Avatar, which is called Sri Sahib Ji Ki Ustat in there. And other Baniya, Ugradanti, for instance, in the Patana Swarup. So then, there is this difference, but you can understand the difference chronologically, that the first edition, Prachar, was done more. And then after 1698, around that time, Guru entered a massive period of warfare. And then where these extra Baniya were added towards the Amrit Sanchar, or probably after, that Prachar of the Bani wasn't done. So actually, the Dasam Granth overall has massive unity. We should really be grateful that the Shaheed Singhs and Guru Gobind Singh, the legacy through all that sacrifice, what has been passed down in a pristine form. But we're not. We're too reductionistic, and we say, well, this doesn't fit with this and with this, but we don't seek to see unity and say, well, why could that be? We discount that immediately. But we need to say, why is that? And it's easy. Guru Gobind Singh wrote more time, scripture got bigger. So basically, there's two main editions you can say of Dasam Granth. Overall, there's a few others that are different, but that's going to happen with any text, or any scripture, any book. There'll be editions, but there's two main types you can say, one with the extra Bani and one with not, without, sorry.
Fair. You touched upon earlier that Bhai Mani Singh's bead had Ard Granth and Dasam Granth compiled into one. Is that then the composition that Khan Singh Nabha, Bhai Khan Singh Nabha, is referring to in Mahan Kosh?
Another really good question. Gurinder Singh Maan from Leicester and myself, after a lot of painstaking work, we kind of pieced together this chronologically. So what you're talking about is, the recension. Should the compilation of it remain together? That's what we're talking about. And the recension in question is Ard Sri Guru Granth Sahib Maharaj with Dasam Granth Sahib Maharaj. But interestingly, that's the history when you read Ratan Singh Pangu, Pant Prakash and other historical texts. It's very clear actually what happened, that this was the case. And obviously we have a manuscript there. And even Ratan Singh Jaggi, he even says this is one of the rare instances in Sikh history, like the Kartarpuri Swarup, you have this Swarup of Bhai Mani Singh, which has all this history behind it. So even he writes that in his book on Dasam Granth. So then if we correlate to that together, what happened there? Khan Singh Nabha says that the Dalpant was meeting to have this Gurmata where the Dasam Granth should stay in one compilation because Bhai Mani Singh had compiled it. Complete nonsense. What they were doing the Gurmata on was whether the Ard Granth and the Dasam Granth should stay together. And then this goes into a controversial story about Bhai Mani Singh being Bandwan Katya Gaya. And there's, we Matha Dek Bhai Mani Singh Ji.
Oh, wow. Sorry, hold on. I've just clocked. Is the controversy then that because the two were separated, that's what led to Bhai Mani Singh being Shaheed in the way he was Shaheed?
Kind of. You got to hear me out what it's about, yeah? So Bhai Mani Singh, when he's compiled this Swarup of Ard and Dasam together, which is in Guru order, so the Rag order is split. Apparently, according to some Sikh scholars and historians, and these are not my words, they say the Sangat cursed Bhai Mani Singh, saying you've split the sect away from the Guru, the Bhagat away from the Guru. In this way, you will also be cut up into pieces.
So from that story, we can then infer that Ard Granth and Dasam Granth are actually part of one recension up to a point, if we were to follow that historical argument.
Kind of. You're on the right lines, but this is what the Sangat didn't understand even at that time, yeah? And I'm not disrespecting the Sangat. Bhai Mani Singh made it for exegesis purposes, for Katha. He wasn't trying to make a new Guru. There was Ard and Dasam Granth. He'd made this big Granth, this big Swarup, to put all the Guru's Bani in order, also with historical, it's got 8 pages of Khas Patare of Guru Gobind Singh's handwritten pages.
It's like a study manuscript rather than a script.
Yeah, that's right. And so he's done it for that, scholaristic purposes for the Panth. And then the Sangat have got the wrong gist. What happens now? People misinterpret someone's intention and then they all get together and go against him. And in the end, he gets Bandwan Katya Gaya. You can see the politics behind this as well, yeah? So he gets Bandwan Katya Gaya. And the thing is, Bhai Mani Singh, that Swarup, we still have it. And we still have that history and this incident. And obviously modern Sikhs won't like that story. They'll say, "Nay, nay, horny sakaraj nas, Bhai Mani Singh was, but they don't realize it's a lack of understanding between a really spiritual person who's trying to do one thing and a group of unpar people in the Sangat. Yeah, I'm sorry to go to that level, but I'm trying to be realistic, yeah?
No, but this is the thing. These are the reasons we have these conversations, because like otherwise, for argument's sake, myself, I never knew really much about Dasam Granth until, to be honest, till our family met yourself. For argument's sake, the question and answer book that I read, you've actually signed it to Dad. And so these conversations are brilliant because obviously whoever gets to listen to it obviously gets to learn quite a lot. So that little story just leads me on to a question that got sent in as well. What are historical views then on I guess what is in the modern parlance called parallel parkash, kind of having Dasam Granth and Ard Granth level? Like, so if we were to go by Khan Singh Nabba's story, that obviously quote unquote it was a split of the recension, and therefore I'm assuming one is higher than the other. But what's the historical viewpoint on that?
I just want to go back to the other question, and then I'll go back onto this. So look at the myth that's created by the Singh Sabha, who are the Pasoria Singh Sabha or the British colonialists, the loyalists. They say the Dasam Granth is compiled by Bhai Mani Singh, who joined these breviaries or pothis to make this Granth. And the Panth is deciding whether this Granth should stay together. That's completely fictitious based on what we said before. What Bhai Mani Singh actually does, because remember we talked about manuscripts before, there's manuscripts from 1696, 1688, a breviary, a pothi. So, there's a whole plethora of manuscript. There's no end, really. There's so many. So then what's actually happened when we examine those manuscripts and Bhai Mani Singh's? What Bhai Mani Singh has done is he's put the Bachittar Natak Granth into one chapter. Because in the original version of 1696, it was incomplete. The Guru had not completed it. So the Bachittar Natak was split with Bani like Chandi Divar. It hasn't got the rubrics. It's Siri Bachittar Natak, etc. That Bani actually goes further towards Charitropakhyan. It should be there according to the latter edition. So Bhai Mani Singh knew the order of what the Bani should be in. That's what actually Bhai Mani Singh did. He completed the work of his Guru, which the Guru ordered him to do. And again, the Anpar of that time and this time still don't understand why Bhai Mani Singh did that.
So let me actually rephrase then what I said earlier. In actuality, Bhai Mani Singh put together a Dasam Granth composition that put the Baniya in order of the Bani, so to speak, in terms of it making thematical sense. So like Guru Gobind Singh Ji's own story. Does that also then explain why, for argument's sake, people like Robin Reinhardt suggest that certain Baniya feel incomplete? Is that because by Mani Singh's composition, for instance, it's not been chopped and changed, but obviously if it's been restructured, it's had to come from somewhere? Or is that not necessarily related?
Well, Randir Singh, research scholar for the SGPC, he says exactly along those lines. Why is Bhai Mani Singh recompiled the Dasam Granth? Because remember, the Granth's already there. If we look at the colophons, the dating. Because the Bachittar Natak, which has one theme, Taram Yudh, about how the Devte defeated the Rakesh, which is a good kind of political analogy. How do we defeat the Mughals? And so that composition, which is very long, is huge. It's that people say the Charitropakhyan is bigger. It's not. The Bachittar Natak is bigger if you count both sections of it as one composition, which people don't want to do because they want to make the Charitropakhyan bigger. So when you put, the Bachittar Natak, when you look at it in its organic unity, that is why Bhai Mani Singh, he put it there because he knew the theme, which is Taram Yudh for that. And so then you had the devotional compositions, then you had Taram Yudh, then you had like political maxims and so on. And that followed the theme, according to Randir Singh, of Kam, Arth, Dharam, Moksha. So these four main themes it comes in, the Char Padarat comes in Sukhmani Sahib. So the Char Padarat, that's how Guru Gobind Singh had intended the Dasam Granth, the themes to flow. So, Gyan Prabodh comes, so it's like Dharam, It has that theme of Dharam in there, or even Arth in there. like Dan, Taram, etc. And then the Charitropakhyan would be, a more political theme or under calm, yeah? So then that's how good the Guru had ordered it, and Bhai Mani Singh knew that. And so then in his revised version of the Dasam Granth, the Bani are obviously all in a different order.
They're only in a different order, but they're not edited in that, if that makes a sense. As in, he's just restructured it into making thematical sense. There's no additions or reductions.
There's no reductions. It's just in a different order, like a different chapter order.
So just to paraphrase what you're saying, Bhai Mani Singh didn't change Dasam Granth Sahib. He simply restructured the previous manuscripts into the correct thematical composition. So Bijata Natak is one, and actually it's a modern problem in not viewing the two sections of Bijata Natak as one, and therefore the controversy obviously relies on Charitropakhyan, which we'll obviously touch upon in a second. You mentioned briefly about how there's a relationship between Char Arth from Guru Granth Sahib Ji and Dasam Granth. Are there any other similarities or differences between the two? And can you explain that relationship? And secondly, I guess this is kind of part of one question, but secondly, putting the recension of Bhai Mani Singh aside, which has Arth Granth and Dasam Granth together, which to be honest blows my mind slightly. What is the historical viewpoint on having parallel parkash between the two as well? So like, obviously I think the relationship affects then how they are parkash, but I will let you enlighten me on that.
Well, the parkash was already in Guru Gobind Singh's time, because Kesar Singh Chibber in Bansavali Nama 1769, and he was with Mata Sahib Deva Ji towards the end, and the other Matama of the Gurus, and he was with the Guru. So he was in the court, and he says, I went in the court and I counted the pages of Vidya Sagar, and I looked at Guru Gobind Singh's Bani. So he had darshan of the parkash. So the parkash was already there. So nobody at Hazur Sahib or the Nahangs, no one's added it. It's always been there. And that again is another fallacy. And that's like, if you look at the manuscript recensions to be a Granth, of course, they're written to be Parkash. But all Maharaj said is, this is my kid. I haven't put Guriyai, I haven't made this the Guru. The Ard Guru Granth Sahib is the Guru. And then we look, why? Because thematically, Ard Guru Granth Sahib is Bhakti. It's about Bhakti. Dasam Granth Sahib is about Shakti. So thematically, they don't mix. But there is similarities, like Japji Sahib. Like how do you jap? How do you do Japana and Jab? So this is like the combination of a japa jab. How's that naam, vibration of naam go in you? Then how does it come out physically? How does that yog change your karam? How do you become a karam yogi, a warrior? How Raj yogi? How you self-actualize? How you bringing your creativity out? So, the Guru Granth Sahib is the inner work and the Dasam Granth is the outer work, you can say. But that's the general gist of it. But, there's some Bani that contradicts that, like by Bhagat Kabir Ji, like Gagan Tamama Baju. And then, Babar Bani by Guru Nanak in Guru Granth Sahib. And then also contradicts in Dasam Granth when you got Shabad, Hazare and Rag. So it contradicts, but there's not many sections like that. And even the contradictory bits, anyone with a Akal knows that the Gurus have put that to balance the Bani. Like the Rag Mala is there to balance that Shanti, that real sage of Guru Granth Sahib with some creativity and colour, like wrapping up this nothingness in these beautiful colours and beautiful form. And so, it's an artistic endeavour also. It's not just these black and white things. There's a lot going on in Gurbani. It's very, very deep. And takes a person all the way to Waheguru. Jaisi, Maharaj Ji Kirpa naal uda naam japunge, asi Bani parunge. But, when we look into the Gurbani, into Dasam Granth and Guru Granth Sahib Maharaj, they're complementary. And that's also touched upon by, in the Rayatnama, where it says the different Pothiyan, brothers and sisters. And then Kesar Singh Chibber says that, these two sloops are like brothers. But one's the older brother and one's the smaller brother. So it's very important to know that they're interrelated. In the Amrit Sanchar, so actual Sikh praxis, the Nityanem, the Ardas, all these different things we do, they come from Sri Dasam Granth and Guru Granth Sahib Maharaj. So we have to realize there is this complementary approach of Miri Piri, which we even see in the architecture that we have with Sri Harmandir Sahib and Akal Takht Sahib facing it. So it's in everything in the Sikhi. It's in the Ard Chand of the Nahangs, the sword and the moon, the sun and the moon. So this isn't a new concept. The Guru Gobind Singh institutionalized what Sri Guru Har Gobind Sahib had made Bargat. And Sri Guru Hargobind Sahib was just, formalizing a stage of Guru Nanak's work. So it was a continuation of this work of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, who was a rebel against ignorance.
I think that was a beautiful answer. I couldn't help but just smile whilst you were answering that. So the two disagreements seem to basically rely upon whether Charitropakhyan in particular... Actually, hold on. Before we get into that, could you explain what Charitropakhyan is to those who aren't necessarily aware? And then we'll go into these questions, because I think otherwise the questions won't necessarily make sense to those listening.
Well, the Charitropakhyan Sahib is a masterpiece of literature, of scripture, which is, it beats the Sistine Chapel, if you look at it, what's in there. And, the Chaupai Sahib, that part, which we get protection from the sword banner, from the Nishan Sahib with the sword, with the Siri Astuj, the one who wields the sword, that Mahakal, that Akal, from who we seek protection, Hamri Karo Hate Racha. That epic composition, which gives us that power to sail through our day protected and at ease, is from the Charitropakhyan. Why? Because Guru Gobind Singh is doing that ardas at the end. Waheguru, please protect me from all of this. And what did Guruji ask for protection from? Charitas, tricks, how we're deceived. Because look in life, things hurt us a lot. But when we're deceived, it hurts a person so much. It's corruption and deception is one of the worst things. I'm not saying it's not in me. Sare which people have got more or less unless they're Brahm Gyani. But the thing is, this dark energy of society, Guru Gobind Singh outlined it. He told the Sangat he wanted to protect us. Remember, the Khalsas, the Guru's son and daughter. Of course, you want to protect your son and daughter from these things. And so then the Guru articulated different stories from different religious traditions, including the Quran, including the Bible, including the Jhatka tales of the Buddhists, including just so much different literature from the world, from Punjabi folklore, from the Alif Lillah, from the Arabic stories. So the Guru looked around the whole world and the Purans and extracted all these types of stories, like Gautama Sakhi, Ahalya Sakhi, Indra Sakhi, where these people, their lust overtook them. And then what happened, what was the result? These stories in Guru Granth Sahib and Guru Gobind Singh, he wrote them in full. So many of those stories already in Guru Granth Sahib Maharaj, in a lot of not in a lot of Shabads, but in some of the Shabads. And Guru Gobind Singh extrapolated on this. So Charitropakhyan is like a moral guide. It's like what you tell your son, like, son, be careful, or you say to your daughter, be careful. It's this kind of thing what Guru's saying to us. And what is the context? There is a king. The king wife wants to have, he's got a son, and she is not the biological mother of the son. But for complete control, she wants to manipulate and seduce the son. So she has complete control over both men. The son won't have it. So she claims that the son has tried to do something. So he's locked up and he's going to be beheaded. So the king before this asked the Mantri, the Brahman, the really wise one, he says, tell him, explain this. And the Brahman knows the boy's innocent. And this is the greatness of the story that Guru Gobind Singh writes. And then he explains through all of these moral stories how this individual is innocent. That's the backdrop of Charitropakhyan. And the Charitropakhyan, masterpiece of writing, is structure, 405 stories. And the 405th story, which is the Chaupai Sahib, has 405 different stanzas. I mean, what level is it on? And, and the Charitropakhyan was completed at Babur Sahib. And Chaupai Sahib was written 13 days, 13 hours and 13 minutes, according to Sikh history. So these are next level things. They're like cosmic. They're like beyond the intellect, beyond rationality, beyond. It's just absolute creativity just coming out.
So in relation to people who suggest it's misogynistic, how would you answer those people who would say because of these certain topics or because it's misogynistic can't be the work of Guru Gobind Singh?
People who who make this accusation that it's misogynistic, most of the time the man is a poor, ignorant fool in the stories. It's not misogynistic. It's talking about the power of women in these circumstances. And then they try to make this kind of propaganda that all the stories are negative. Let's talk about one story, the Queen of Holland. She's going to be attacked on all sides. Her husband has died. So what does she do? She hasn't got an army which is as big as the army approaching. So she gets all the soldiers to paint an extra soldier. And then they put all of these around the castle. When these soldiers are approaching from far, they think they're real and they turn around and go back. Is that derogatory? So there's all these other fantastic stories about how women are powerful and men are powerful, and that Shakti, which God gives us, that buddhi, that intellect, that understanding, how it can get us out of trouble and how to prevent that, and how sometimes these things are used in a negative way. So it's not misogynistic in the least. It's a guide to understand how we shouldn't fall into these kind of traps, because these kind of traps are really painful and destroy lives. You know, it's not a little issue. And so, you know, we can meditate all we want, but do we know how to live life? And so this is trying to teach us, like, hey, son, daughter, be careful of this, be careful of that. And who, you know, the Shabad in Guru Granth Sahib, it says, who has not been bitten by Kam, by Krodh? Who hasn't in this Maya? So of course, in this world, how would the Guru guide the Khalsa who's going to be a king? Let's remember in India, when a child of a ruler was schooled by the Brahmin, he was taught the Hitopadesh, and the Hitopadesh of the stories in the Dasam Granth, in the Charitropakhyan, from the Hitopadesh. So this is about these type of Aleph Lera, these type of didactic stories, didactic, to give an moral understanding or dharmic understanding to this person, this Khalsa, to, hey, look, don't go down this route, Hamri karo hate racha, seeking protection from those things. So I think that it's a bit of a skewed view and it hasn't got context.
Just touching upon something. So a lot of Indian nationalists would argue that because a lot of the Dasam Granth compositions are, so to speak, inspired by Puranic texts, which they are, like we're not disagreeing. Therefore, it lacks originality or mastery or whatever. In actuality, it obviously does if you were to read it. But secondly, isn't the inclusion or the creation of Dasam Granth actually also a social revolution? Because as you said, it's only the children of royalty who are being educated by the Brahmins, whereas the Khalsa was a revolution. It was a social revolution. Therefore, the masses are now being educated in the bits of education that were actually kept for royalty and being taught by Brahmins.
Yeah, so, you know, this kind of assertion that Guru Gobind Singh used the Puranic mythology, so the Dasam Granth lacks originality, you know, it's nationalistic and so on and so forth. Well, let's have a look at this in great detail. First thing is that within Dasam Granth, Guru Gobind Singh is critical of those texts. He also praises the text, but he also gives criticism of the text, sometimes saying this text is so lengthy, it will take me ages to explain it all, so I'm just going to explain it briefly. That's quite a big criticism.
But isn't that itself also a social revolution? Because as you mentioned previously, those people who were being educated in those texts that Guru Gobind Singh Ji was paraphrasing, so to speak, were only kept for Brahmins or people of royalty.
Sure, but let's go through this carefully. Like, look, so the first thing is what Guru Gobind Singh is translating from or talking about. He criticizes it. He also praises it. But what is his emphasis? This is the point I wanted to get to, Amar Singh. His emphasis isn't what Durga was doing off the battlefield, isn't who she knew, isn't who Krishna knew and what they did in their free time. It was, when were they fighting? What happened on the battlefield? What the Judd was like? This is what Guru Gobind Singh focuses on. Battle. That's the theme, Dharam Yudh. It isn't any part of the story or anything else, hardly ever. There's some sections where Guru has, but generally the main theme is war. So that is a revolution, because it gives uneducated people, in the sense that they haven't learned Sanskrit, the ability to access their ancestry, their mythological stories, the stories that their people had made, and empower themselves and get out of the Brahmanic class and forge a future for themselves. So this was a huge revolution. This was not a little thing. Let's look at Guru Arjan Dev Ji. Shahidi is related to Guru Ji compiling Guru Granth Sahib Maharaj, because it was considered a rival to the Quran, etc. You can read this in some of the old texts. And here's Guru Gobind Singh rivaling. But at the same time, Guru Gobind Singh has majesty. He's not critical in a negative way. He's just being very practical, saying that was for then, and now this is now. And even Guru Gobind Singh, let's look at this criticism. People talk about Ram and Krishna. Maharaj writes, very interesting, he says, people call these great kings gods now. What else can I say? So the thing is, we need to look in context. There's even, Brahmanism's criticism that criticized there. And there's a Shabad where Maharaj is talking to a Brahman saying, I'm sorry I had to feed the Khalsa before you, but it's my principle to feed the warrior before the Brahman. So the Dasam Granth is heavily anti-Brahmanistic. It's not against the knowledge of the Brahmins, it's against their hierarchy. And this is a very important point. And I always try to tell people, knowledge is sacred. But when people capitalize on it, this is not sacred. And this is what Guru Gobind Singh was against. Guru Gobind Singh wanted a fraternity of mankind where knowledge was for the many, not for the few.
Just in your response, there's something that I just wanted to pick up on because it's actually a question that got sent in, which is, so another criticism that's often put on Dasam Granth is that there's almost a declaration of caste, so to speak. So there's obviously the declaration that Maharaj comes from the Kshatriya lineage. What would you, or how would you respond to that? Because a lot of people would say, oh, that can't be the Guru's writing because Sikhi is anti-caste.
Society is very strange and governments are very strange. When things are going good, they want everyone to be peaceful. And when war comes, they want everyone to be a warrior. How do you consolidate these two positions? How do you consolidate that? What do you do? And worldwide, as we've gone more into industrialized, and now we're going to go into the artificial intelligence world and robotic world, where there's less and less work for people. How do you pacify a massive population on the planet? You take away their warrior traditions. And Guru Gobind Singh, why does he use this warrior archetype? Because people are going, what's that got to do with it? Why does Guru Gobind Singh use that? Because look at what industrialization did around the world. It destroyed the Aboriginal race near now. All the indigenous native races of South America, North America, Canada, even here in Europe, all over the world. Why? Because they're warrior races. And that's why Guru Gobind Singh says, Kshatri ko poot hai, Brahman ko na hai. I'm the son of a warrior. I'm not the son of a theoretical Brahman. I'm here to fight for the truth. I'm not here to sit on the sideline. That's the spirit that they wanted to take out of us. And they can't take it out of us. And that's the reality. And if people think governments are going to say to you, keep Shastra and be Tiyar, but Tiyar, doesn't matter what government is in the world, whether it's Indian, all the governments are the same. Khalsa is his own government. And that's what Dasam Granth Sahib is saying. So Guru Gobind Singh wanted us to be a sovereign nation, and therefore we had to be armed, which is the whole purpose.
I don't disagree. You've already kind of actually answered this bit, but so I personally, my opinion is that I think a lot of the modern studies that have been done, so kind of Pasoria onwards, on Dasam Granth, which have come up with these negatives and these criticisms, I personally think that they've started in what most people would class as kind of normative Sikh theology. So the Sikh theology you'd read in a textbook, so to speak, perhaps up until like the last 5-10 years or so, which argues a very Christian idea or a Christian framework or Judeo-Christian framework of the Sikh religion. And by default, obviously, colonial period it inherits a lot of kind of the Victorian ideals and maxims, etc., and those kind of morals. So to put it bluntly, they were starting with the wrong framework, in the sense that they were looking at Dasam Granth not within Indic Sikh tradition. They were looking at it within a colonized Christian idealized version of Sikh religion that had been created by, for argument's sake, Singh Sabha and others.
Yeah, 100%. And even MacLeod, who's a Christian, ex-Christian priest, he said, the Dasam Granth for Victorian prudes was too much. And a part of the next book I'm working on, I'm translating Trump's words in German, where And in English, where he's saying, I just refuse to translate this, because for them it's too graphic. It's too in your face. It's too raw. The violence, of what's happening on the battlefield. Heads are coming off. Blood's everywhere. The vultures are coming in, pecking at the bones. Someone's head gets smashed. Blood is leaking out of someone's neck. The blood is shining off the shastra and spraying everywhere. They don't want to translate that. Of course, they don't want to translate it. It's bloodthirsty. It makes you a man. Makes you have hairs on your chest. Of course, they don't want to translate that. And the thing is, then if you look at the theme, what we're talking about there, about the colonialism, then not only have you got the colonialists themselves, but then the new sardars from the bourgeoisie Sikhs and the royal Sikh, they study in the universities, so they get influenced again, so they become colonialized. Then they make their own Singh Sabha, their own reform movement, their own Protestant movement against the Catholicism, you can say, is a crude example. But they make their own movement, a reform movement. And what do they do with that? Of course, they reject the Indic traditions because they're ashamed of themselves, because they want to copy their white masters. They're ashamed of their Indian root. Yeah, they're ashamed of being Indian. I'm not ashamed of being Indian. I'm not ashamed of being Punjabi. Why should I be? My guru was Punjabi. My guru was Indian. That's what the land he came from. When you say India now, people look at it politically. Oh, he's saying he's with the Indian government. I'm just with the land of Punjab, with India. It's in India and the bloody geography. Fucking leave me alone. Yeah?
Well, Guru Gobind Singh Ji is born in Patna, which is now part of Bihar, right? So that's not even part of Punjab historically, isn't? Correct me if I'm wrong.
But it doesn't mean you're a bloody Indian nationalist. It means you stand for that land. You stand for Punjab. You stand for where it's from. Because that's where the Guru took all that vidya and the knowledge. I'm proud of where I come from. Proud. I'm never going to lose my root. And this was the thing of cutting off the roots of these young men and indoctrinating them with that guilt-ridden filth, which we reject in the modern world now, and we embrace that and we think is religion. This is disgusting. It's not dharam. It's just fake and disgusting. Plastic. We have to stand up. We have to claim our traditions. We have to realize what the Shaheed Singhs did, so we can be Khalsa. And what Guru Gobind Singh did, every page of Dasam Granth is written in love, but it's written in the blood. The blood of who? His own father's sacrifice. You imagine your father was executed, how you would deal with that. Guru Gobind Singh armed up his men. He never got revenge, but he got justice. He got justice. And that's why they don't want us to read Dasam Granth Sahib. They don't want us to be noble. They want us to be ripping at each other's throats and pulling each other's trousers down like we are now, like fools in India and here. They don't want to give us dignity. Look at this morcha. Thank God everyone's getting together in the Kisan morcha. The Ann of the Mother Earth. Thank God that's united the whole Panth. The Ann, the Mother Earth. Thank God, because we were so divided. I see hope with this now, that we all standing together. But why are we standing together? For the land of Punjab. But let's not forget, that's a part of a bigger world. Raj karega Khalsa, whole dunya will become Khalsa. But we need to stop pulling each other's pants down. And that's what why Dasam Granth was written, telling us how to be noble. And you know what? I've probably been the worst person to do that. Probably the worst. But that's one thing I've learned in these couple of years. Don't pull anyone's trousers down. Hold everybody's up.
Just then, would you suggest that because we've inherited this colonial religious concept, that's what's led to the misunderstanding of Dasam Granth and then these inaccurate controversies? Because actually, if you were to study it in its rightful context, it makes sense and everything can be perfectly explained, as we've just demonstrated.
I'd say that, but I'd add another dimension to it. If you look at the colonialists, they weren't stupid. They were mythologians, theologians, linguists, savants, engineers. You have to respect their knowledge. And their knowledge was so great that they re-engineered us on a lower level. mentally, modifying the language, practices, traditions, reforms to disempower us. So the fact is, and we can go into so much about this, editing of Gurbani, look how Chaupai Sahib is cut down, again, taking out the mother, energy, Kirpa Kari Hum Par Jag Mata. And then, because it's got the whole framework, it tells a reference to the bigger Charitropakhyan. So then who's going to be inquisitive when you take that reference out to look at the bigger corpus so you learn more? There's a whole load of engineering from the Kirpan, which is, a 3-foot sword, to this little Kirpan, which is blunt. I can go on and on, rare ass modification, the Bani before, the Ragmala issue, calendars. The list goes on, kakars, the list goes on and on. From disarming, so we don't keep shastar, we don't keep, like rifles or guns, that it becomes more and more symbolic to the extent that we say, oh, what's the point of even having these rituals? Let's just even leave that.
Yeah, let's just wear a little kirpan on our neck or in our case. Or...
That's it. So we're seeing this, this kind of, what we've seen in our lives is that kind of colonial weed in the flower of the Khalsa growing, but now we started to die off.
Yeah. I like that analogy. That's a good way of putting it. You touched upon briefly about how obviously there's a part of Chaupai Sahib that's removed because of, amongst other things, its reference to Mata and the kind of the female energy. Obviously, that doesn't fit in within a modern Sikhism, Singh Sabha understanding of Sikhi. And obviously a lot of people, because they don't understand the relationship or how that sits in within wider Sikh theology or understanding, what explanation would you provide or what would you say to them to help them better understand that Bhagoti, that female divine energy that is within Dasam Granth?
Look, it's a really good question. There's a lot in there. Well, look in Guru Granth Sahib, Tum Mat Pita, you my mother and my father. Hana? So in Jap Sahib, Namo Lok Mata, and Kirpa Kari Hum Par Jag Mata, Chaupai Sahib. Mata comes many times, Sri Bhagoti, another feminine divine, comes many, many times in Dasam Granth, it's a theme. And so if we look in Guru Granth Sahib, Har, Krishan, Ram, they're all masculine names of God. In Dasam Granth, Guru Gobind Singh chose feminine name. There's nothing wrong with that. It still fits the overall theology. And is there a Sikh theology? No, there isn't a Sikh theology. Because theology itself is theology is a study because you just reach higher and higher theologies, if that makes sense. And Guru Granth Sahib is the encyclopedia of every theology to the end. And so, monotheism, panentheism, polytheism, Advaita Vedanta, it's all in there to the ultimate, because it's explaining every single spiritual state. So monotheism is a spiritual state. Everyone goes higher, 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 and the Guru takes it to the end. And what is the biggest? That's where Guru Nanak Dev Ji begins. Oneness.
So my own personal understanding, and this is just piqued my curiosity now, and you're the perfect person to obviously ask this. So my personal understanding recently changed after I started to read Akal Takht, and I basically realized that Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Bani is anti-theistic in that Maharaj is saying this concept of God, quote unquote, basically shove it. We don't need any conception of the divine. And hear me out on that. Is what I mean is that there is obviously a divine. There is a itness, there is a one, there is a ik, however you wish to define it, but it's not put it in another way, as soon as you've created the word, you've created a separation. And as soon as you created the separation, there's you've created the distance between the one and the you, and therefore there's a duality. And in actuality, all Maharaj is saying is once you've transcended the ego and the Maya, you merge back into the itness. Although that gives the impression Maya and the ego is not part of itness, that is also part of the same itness in the way yin and yang are part of the same thing. So I would probably go as far as saying that actually that religious framework doesn't even fit within Sikh understanding, and I would actually go as far as rejecting Sikh theology. You can well understand why I would think that, coming with kind of dad understanding, but I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
How can you explain mystery? How can I tell you what love is in words?
You can't.
Right. So Waheguru or this experience or whatever, the divine, we can't have words, but we know what we're talking about. Right? Because we feel it, but we're taught not to care about the feeling. The feeling is very important. The subjective is equally masculine and feminine. Objective and subject, equally important. And the thing is, that experience, how can we say that experience is a theology? Like you said, as soon as we contain it, it changes. It's no longer what we really said it is. And that's why look at what is in Guru Granth Sahib, singing, Gauna. As we sing to the divine, because we're not trying to define the divine. We're not trying to say this is the truth, this is the reality. We're saying everything is the truth, everything is the reality, everything is the Tao, and it's not exclusive. It includes all. It's ik, is one. So that worldview is like just a different level, bro. And we need to look at what Guru Maharaj gave us very carefully. And when we do, we realize, of course, we're not any other religion. Of course, we're not any other thing. We are Khalsa. And that means we're devoid of all identity. We're just pure. And that pure, what is that purity? That purity is shunya, emptiness, nothingness, void, empty, stillness, silence. And if you want to sing, you have to be very silent. The more you can be silent, the greater you are at singing. Your depth is this silence. And this is what the Guru gave us, the Zen. The samurai, again, that Zen. You can't be a warrior. You can't pick up a sword if you haven't got Zen. And this isn't my words. That sword is wielded by that warrior in the correct fashion if on the battlefield that person has patience. So that Zen, that emptiness, that's where Guru Nanak begins in it. That's where Guru Nanak begins. We should be ashamed. We don't know what gift Guru Maharaj has given us. And that ik is there not just for us. You know why it's Rajagriga Khalsa? We talked about all this. What's the main slogan of Dasam Granth Sahib? Deg, deg, fateh. Deg, deg, fateh. We hear everyone say it. And it comes from Dasam Granth. It's not in Guru Granth Sahib. It's in Dasam Granth. What does it mean? Victory to that langar, to that degga, charity, and to the sword. This is how Guru Gobind Singh made us, the balance between Guru Granth Sahib and Dasam Granth Sahib. Look at what's happening at Morcha. We're in the passive stage now. We're just doing langar. Maybe one day we'll need to pick up Shastra. Then we become warriors. So we're saint soldiers. That's why the Nahangs are there. That's why it's all... And it's brilliant that the Nahang Singhs are showed and finally took place. It makes me have like so much pride in my Del. That actually...
Same, man.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I was so warm when I saw them rock up. I was like, yeah, that's like, in terms of history, and I can well imagine you share the same feeling. I was like, that is the right place at the right time to turn up. And to turn up in the fashion they turned up and the way that they've just carried themselves out and the omelets and jars they've done. Oh, man, it is, yeah, as you said, utmost pride. Like, you cannot describe the euphoria.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, finally, ultimately it's in Guru Gobind Singh's hand. Guru Gobind Singh finally, for whatever went wrong in the Nahang Singh history, whatever karam or whatever bad luck, whatever you want to call it, whatever the events were, finally they've overturned and the Nahangs are there and accepted and treated like the rest of the Sangat. So that's a really beautiful thing that the Khalsa who's carried Dasam Granth Sahib and the Deg Deg Fateh and all of these different types of traditions and everything to relate to the battle, from going from the langar, from the seva to the sacrifice, from service to sacrifice. Service and sacrifice are the same. And they run both down the middle, they're the same thing. So this is this concept that Guru Maharaj made, the Panth of Buddha Dal is of Guru Nanak. And that's why the Nahang Singhs call themselves Buddha Dal, because Guru Nanak made Baba Buddha Ji one of his main journal. And we know Guru Har Gobind Sahib did. When I mean main journal, Baba Buddha Ji was one of the main sect of Guru Nanak. Then he became a general of the Sheme Pasha. And that's why the Buddha Dal come from Guru Nanak Dev Ji, from that ikness, that oneness. And that's what this understanding of non-duality is, what the thing that the Naujawan, the new people coming to Sikhi, Sikh scholars, researchers, they need to look at the framework of non-duality if they're going to assess Sikhi, Because we know this academically from the work of Arvind Parliamandir, brilliant work. And we know from even a bigger work by Dr. Richard King. So why are we messing around? This is in academia. We're not messing around. Even Trump, who was a Christian priest and hated the Panth like anything, he thought we were scoundrels and disgusting and wished, he said, these people will be shown in museums one day. They're a thing of history, right? Even he said, wow, this theology is really, really deep, and all we can say is about non-duality. So why we know more than somebody who's an expert in 20 languages and theology and everything like that? Why we know more? We've got to look at what Gurbani is telling us. Let's look at Dasam Granth. Har harjan do ek hai, bib bichar kachnahe, jalte tarang upajio, jal hi bike samaye. So God and God's being are one. There's no difference between them. Like a ripple forms in water or the ocean, it merges back in with the ocean. Now, what's the difference between the ripple and the ocean? And that's a non-dualistic concept. And then we say, oh, that's for Brahmgyanis, really? Is that what Guru Maharaj said? Maharaj said, in Sarblo Granth, Maharaj says, Atam ras jo jani soi khalas dev. Prabh mein, moh mein, tas mein ranchak nahi pev. And there's also the Jagat Jot Swaye in Teti Swaye in Dasam Granth Sahib. And what's that? What's Maharaj saying in the Sarblo and Dasam? Somebody who merges with the light within them has merged in with Guru Gobind Singh, has become one with God and is God. Prabh mein, moh mein, tas mein ranchak nahi pev. There's no difference. Why was the Khalsa given the Guryai? Because the Khalsa had merged into the Guru had merged into the Khalsa. So this is another thing that's been happened. We've made Guru Granth Sahib a scripture, the Guru, Guru Granth Sahib is the Guru without any shadow of a doubt. But what we've done is sideline the physical, the Khalsa. We forget we have to take Amrit from the Khalsa. We have to get initiated by the Khalsa, which is Bani from Dasam Granth. So, the Sikh and the Guru are inseparable. They're the same, and that's why the Guru gave us his form, because it's non-duality. It's Shunya. There's no hierarchy. Seva did the seva of the Sangat. That's how a Guru became a Guru. They did the seva of the Guru and the Sangat. How today do we get our Kalyan in exactly the same fashion? We have to serve Guru Granth Sahib Maharaj and Maharaj's Sangat, and there's no other way. Service. So the fact is, why is there all this delusion? Because we're using monotheistic models on scriptures that cannot be scrutinized in that way.
So to be blunt, we have the wrong tools to assess our own understanding, basically.
We have a pickaxe trying to open an iPhone.
Yeah, we're just going to smash it. Yeah, literally. I think that's a brilliant way of analogizing that. What I actually find quite brilliant is there's a lot of the next few questions you've already touched upon in just what we've been talking about. The two main things are actually about kind of 17th, 18th century texts that touch upon Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. So one in particular that gets time and time again, and there's a particular controversy around it, is Kesar Singh Chibber is mentioned in Banswali Namad about Guru Gobind Singh Ji worshipping a Devi. Yeah, and I know that's a crude analogy of the story. And a lot of historians have misinterpreted that in order to argue, oh, this can't be Guru Gobind Singh Ji's work because it doesn't fit within normative Sikh theology. And as we've just spoken about, we've already written that framework off as being ill-suited to understand the Dasam Granth and Sikhi, just full stop. But in relation to that controversy, what would you say to those people, and how would you explain that in its context?
So we're talking about the Devi, when the Devi becomes Pargat, yeah?
Yes, and the Havan that takes place, yeah.
Well, look, first thing is this. Let's look at Kartar Singh, historian. He was the first historian who wrote against the Janam Sakhis. And he said the Janam Sakhis can't be historically verifiable because they're just hagiographies with these really grandiose stories about the gurus, utilizing them. There's very little historical content. But look, you need to look at hagiography or religious texts with a historical scientific tool. Again, is from the last analogy, pickaxe on an iPhone. That's not what the Janam Sakhi was there for. The Janam Sakhi was there for to give us mythological, symbolic understanding. For instance, there's a story where Guru Naina Devi Ji, he meets a yogi, and then the yogi challenges the Guru to do pranayam. And it is said in this story that Guru's in-breath was half a year and his out-breath was half a year. So he sat there for a whole year on one breath. the guru's authority in that matter was more than the yogis. That's what the story illustrates. But you have to have the right side of your brain to symbolically interpret that story. You cannot take it literally from the left side of the brain. So you have to look at it through a mythological lens, yeah? So the way that we look at the Durga episode, it has to be in exactly the same way. Those stories are not written there for us to take them literally. We have to look at them laterally and literally. What's the historical sense in this? What is the spiritual sense in it? So the Devi, what does it mean? The Brahmins who, Naina Devi, who puj Naina Devi, a form of Durga, Mata, they say they have a certain power over her. But what's the actual meaning? Again, the Brahmins can't succeed in making her become Pargat, but Guru Gobind Singh does. Have you seen? That's the whole theme of Dasam Granth. It's the same theme. The Guru makes the Devi Pargat, the Brahmins can't. So we've got to look at it. Number one, that's the meaning of the story. And number two, what does that mean on a spiritual level? It means the divine is not just some male entity like Zeus. The divine is also feminine. It's a protector. It's a she. She's heroic. She has valor. Isn't that a great image for any woman to be? And this is what Guru Gobind Singh wanted to inculcate in his daughters with Chandi Divar and all this. You know, a man, how much does he love his daughter over his son? We forget, we don't see what Guru Gobind Singh did for the woman to uplift her. Chandi Divar, Siri Pagoti, saying the sword is the Mata, is the mother. She is the protector. She is the breast milk of nature. She is the Mata Tar. She is the word, the Bani. We learn to speak from our mother. She is the Bani herself. She is the divine speak. Isn't that so beautiful to give the divine a feminine form? How beautiful. What a poet. What a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful being Guru Gobind Singh was. To encapsulate that in Gurbani. And yet people, it hurts them. The divine is feminine. Why does it hurt them? Because they're conformist, they are prejudiced, and they are looking at Sikhi through a colonial, Protestant, Christian framework, which does not fit that Bani.
You took the words straight out of my mouth. There's only a few questions left. So the main one then, would I be ignorant to say that the controversy comes along with Basoria, or does it come about earlier than him?
Well, the Bandai Khalsa, there's some historical evidence, even though it's later. It comes more after about 1850 odd. You find some kind of historical anecdotes or you know, kind of like descriptions of the Bandai Khalsa and talking about how they rejected the Guru Gobind Singh's Bani. So we know that this happened probably from the evidence we have. We know that the Bandais were a schism group. So we don't know how accurate that is, but we put that aside and we look at other history. Is really Cunningham 1849 who brings this on. It's not in any Sikh text before that. There's no question of the authorship or anything like that. So
Basoria basically inherits his colonial master's issues.
That's right. So yeah, Basoria, he was a civil servant of the British. They gave him a school, a printing press. He tried to create his own Guru Granth Sahib. He was excommunicated from the Panth. And, he got a 16-year-old girl pregnant, and that was his second wife. So the fact is, I think it says it all about this man, but he was very spiritual. Some people have different sides. He was a very charismatic person. He knew a lot of Gurbani. He was great at Kirtan. He initiated one of the Panj Pyare for Bhai Mani Singh, who was a great Sikh mystic and a great Sikh freedom fighter against the British. So Teja Singh Basoria, he wasn't evil. This guy was a great Kirtani, Bhagat, Gyani, but he again goes against this Sargun Bhagati, this form Bhagati, this kind of Bhagati that is world affirming. His Bhagati is more world negating, and it's based on this kind of guilt-ridden framework, and it's not embracing life or spirit within life. It's looking for a nirvanic experience or peak experience, and that's all that counts. While Hukum for a sec is everything that's going on is a peak, because that is the Naam, Naam Pana, Naam Pana is all, and Naam, Pana and Hukam are one thing. They're one concept. They're logos, they're Konkar. So, this man, he was a divided man. So he got up to a lot of stuff, and that's, I talked about the Guru Granth Sahib edition that he tried to create, and they were going to bury it at Hazur Sahib. And that's written in Professor Sahib Singh's book.
Quickly, just on that, I was just about to ask, and is this the same guy who created the controversy about Ragmala? Kamalroop Singh Pardesi has a book on Ragmala, which is a compilation of numerous other sants and Mahapurushas and intellectuals' understanding on Ragmala and its place within Sikhi. And there's 3 variations of the story that come up in relation to, I think it's Pasola, correct me if I'm wrong, who basically says Ragmala isn't Bani, and then he takes this new printed copy of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji to, I think in the story it's Harmandir Sahib, and they basically do an ardas and say, all right, if Meti is correct or incorrect, show us a sign, and he goes blind or his tongue falls out or something pretty painful happens. Is this the same person then that we're talking that we're referring to?
I think you've got the story conflated with Sobha Singh, who took the Ragmala out.
Sorry, okay.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's a similar narrative. He's very talented, and he gets ultimately excommunicated because of his kind of like censorship or reformation of the Sikh Maryada, and including cutting down the Jobe Sahib, Ragmala, Keshki Zakar, getting rid of any Musliman doing Kirtan, the Marasis, the Rababis. And, so we could talk all night about his reforms. And then, when we go into, you said, did he create this? Well, actually, you find some of these debates in Nirmala texts, because some of the Nirmala, they went to Kanchi, they learnt Sanskrit, they became very Brahmanic. Then they started scrutinizing Guru Granth Sahib in that way. So then they had doubts over particular passages or parts. And so Pasoria kind of carried that on. And we know also the Nirmala have not always been loyal to the Panth. They were aligned to the British for a long while. So it's obvious that this kind of stuff, again, with the Cunningham project, is the Nirmala was his informant anyway for that book. So it all ties together. I mean, there isn't much evidence, but you can tie it together. It has the pink, rosy tintedness of the Nirmala tradition within it.
It's suggestive. Just something that you mentioned about the Bandai Khalsa. So from my limited understanding, this schism came about after Banda Singh Bahadur. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, but it was the schism happened in Banda Bahadur's life.
So there's some contemporary records, like Vakil records from the time, that kind of point to Banda Singh Bahadur basically always kind of pointing towards follow the Guru. So I haven't necessarily seen anything contemporary that suggests there was a schism, quote unquote, led by him, or is that a misunderstanding? Because a lot of the stuff, as you said, comes about a lot later, and then some of the stuff that I read about Bungu in relation to why he had written what he writes about Banda Singh Bahadur is because he's related to Baba Binod Singh, who leaves at that point in whatever fort they're in. Have I connected the wrong dots?
But they're all really good points. But when you go into Bansavali Nama 1769, Kesar Singh Chibber, I remember Chibber is a descendant of the Matidas, Satidas, the Aldas. They were Brahmins who became Sikh and were Shaheed with Guru Tegh Bahadur Maharaj at Chandni Chowk. And so, he's not a nobody, he's a Chibber. Chaupa Singh was also a Chibber who wrote the Chaupa Singh Rahatnama. So these are Hazuri Sikh, these are prize Sikhs by the Guru. Their Vidya is very high.
So they're not Hindus as a lot of people in the modern sense are?
Of course not. They're Amritari, they're Singhs, they're Shaheeds. They were Shaheeds, and we forget they're Brahmins. You see how fine the line is, what we're talking about here, right? And the thing is, so the Shibbers and the Rahatnama and then Bansavali Nama with Banda Singh Bahadur. So Banda Singh Bahadur in Bansavali Nama, Kesar Singh Chibber describes this whole story that Bungu was talking about, that Gyani Gyan Singh talks about. He tells you what happened. And we can see the Hukamname of Banda Bahadur. And you can see, Fateh Darshan, he's changed the Fateh. He's changed different Maryadas. And he's established himself. He's writing Hukamname like the Guru would. So he's established himself on the Guru's Gaddi. And this is why the Tat Khalsa didn't accept him. But saying that, he was still a great Shaheed of Guru Nanak. Even though he went off the path, he made a massive Qurbani. But we should tell the truth about who he was. He was really great, he fell, and then he was really great and got Shaheed. Isn't that a heroic story? But we ruin his story. We want him to be perfect. It's a real story. It's like, like William Wallace and Braveheart, yeah? Some of the characters in there. Robert or Bruce, he's a better description. Because remember, he hates his father. Because his father sides with the British. And then in the end, he's on the last battle, isn't he? Fighting against the British. That's Bandai Singh Bahadur. Isn't that an epic story? And they try and McDonaldize it. They just make it, so everyone wants to make it so perfect and beyond belief. This guy was perfect. No, historians got it wrong. No, they got it all right. This was this character, but he was a great bugger. He was a great warrior. He was a great mystic. He had occult powers, blah, blah, blah. This was him. Let's say who he was. Let's respect who he was and make him who he was and real, not some figment, from a cartoon.
So contemporary records, like Vakil records at the time that do refer to Bandai Singh Bahadur as Guru, that isn't ignorance. That's actually them reflecting his own, what he was trying to replicate, so to speak. So he was trying to set himself up as the next Guru then.
100%.
Fair?
100%. But look, but the thing is, but the Sikh Raj was not possible without Bandai Singh Bahadur. The Qurbaniya he did, that justice he got on behalf of his Guru Gobind Singh. We forget that part. But then the ego got to him. He declared himself the Guru according to the stories. But what happens in the end? He's Shaheed. And he's Shaheed in the name of Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And that's all that counts. He went off, so what? What a beauty. And that's what Kesar Singh Chibber says. He writes it all what happened. He said, but we can't say it. He goes, no one born is on the level of Bandai Singh Bahadur. That's how high a Shaheed he looked at him. And no one was. And I bow to that Shaheed Singh's feet, and everyone should too. That's why he's remembered. And he should be too. So, the Bandai Khalsa, that's why, now you look, they're the militant group. So once the leader's gone, then the government gets involved. And again, even that time, they say, no Dasam Granth. We can extrapolate that a little bit, but it's very hard to prove that. But you see, it's got a theme that goes back, yeah? It's Gandhi Gyan Singh talks about in 1888 in Dwari Gur Khalsa about Bandai Bahadur and them not reciting the Chopi Sahib in the Reras.
So arguably you could say the Bandai Khalsa were the original reform movement, which actually puts then the Tat Khalsa on its head, because in the modern sense, Tat Khalsa is synonymous with the Singh Sabha, but actually in the Bandai Singh Bahadur's time, it's the reverse, in that the Bandai Khalsa is the reform movement. Mad, I've learned a lot today. Fair play.
But this doesn't stop with him. Look at Tirman. Look at Ram Rai.
Yeah, it's consistent within Sikh history. That's a good point. All I was going to add to what we were just talking about was that in actuality, what we've touched upon is kind of like a real history, so to speak. So we've spoken about Bhai Mani Singh, we've spoken about Bandai Singh Bahadur, and we've made them real people rather than romanticize them in this kind of modern religious sense, which actually also removes any kind of reality to these people. It kind of turns them into like myths almost. So I've enjoyed that quite a lot. Just to summarize then, last question actually, how would you summarize Dasam Granth in a few sentences?
Dasam Granth Sahib is written in the spirit of a warrior to inspire Sikhs and anybody righteous to pick up a weapon against what is unrighteous if all other means have failed, using various analogies and also moral guides for when those people reach sovereignty and they don't get pulled into deception, which the enemy will always use against any group of settled people or societies.
Fair answer. Oh, there's actually one question that I haven't asked. Why hasn't the SGPC reinstalled Sri Dasam Granth at Akal Takht? I guess the assumption in that is that Dasam Granth was parkash at Akal Takht. Is there historical evidence for that?
There is historical evidence because in the 1898 report, they talk about the Akal Takht Sarup, which was actually taken there by Bhai Mani Singh, had a very early colophon of 1698 AD, which is mentioned in the report of the Sordid Committee. So that report of the Sordid Committee references that Sarup. That Sarup is traceable, as well as other Sarups that are at the Akal Takht Sahib. And we know from anecdotal information by the British and other European travellers and also theologians and linguists that Dasam Granth was parkash at the Akal Takht Sahib. There's enough references about that. Unfortunately, we haven't found a photograph yet. I'm sure we'll find one. Gurinder's been looking for one. Gurinder Singh Man of Leicester and myself and others. We haven't managed, but I'm sure we will. But we have all the written history of where the Dasam Granth was Prakash. And yeah, that's when we can say when the Dasam Granth Sahib is Prakash again, that's when we can see the Khalsa Raj returning. But until we don't honour Guru Gobind Singh's Bani, we're going to be stuck in this rut.
Fair. No, fair enough. Is there anything that you wanted to include or anything you think's worth mentioning just while we're at it?
I think my vichar is that everyone has a right to their opinion, and no two men or women look at life in the same way or anything in the same way. But what I invite people listening to this podcast to do is don't listen to me or any other speaker or Amar. You need to go on the internet, do your own research, look back, trace back. Be forensic, look through. You're educated in Western universities speaking English, and even in India, you'll be speaking English listening to this. And research, look, is what I'm saying rubbish? Is it true? Did Malcolm 1805 talk about two granths? And before that, did Cunningham and others? There's so many European travellers who have. So don't just take our word for it. Don't take my word for it. Look up the manuscript evidence. Look through everything you'll find. Even most of the manuscripts now, they're all online, believe it or not. Please don't ask me for copies because I haven't got time to keep sending people copies. They're all online and you can find all of them. If you search diligently, you'll find it all. So the fact is there's so much information on the internet. Use it all to research what is Sikhi, what's in Guru Granth Sahib. Try to learn Gurmukhi, the original language. The first thing to colonialize someone is you take away their language. And what's the first step there? You change change the letters. So let's not have that happen to us. Let's learn Gurmukhi. It's holy. Let's learn Guru's language and let's lift each other up. Let's stop pulling each other's pants down. And I'll put my hand up saying I've done it and a million other things. I'm trying my best. And the thing is, look, let's move forward, get vidya, knowledge, appreciate knowledge, become learned and being proud of being learned. We're actually proud of being uneducated. We're proud of it, Let's be proud of being learned. Let's learn Shastra Vidya. Let's learn hunting, shooting, rifles, guns. Let's learn all this. Let's learn about military strategies. Let's strengthen ourselves. Let's do it. Let's be rebellious. We're not here to take over anyone's political systems, but we're here to be men and be free. So we do it. Let's learn. We're not doing anything illegal. Let's learn all this vidya and let's embrace the Dasam Granth Sahib, read the scripture, go through it, try to understand it, try to go through this podcast, the work of Gurinder, myself, Robin Reinhardt's book, other academic books, read stuff that contradicts us on the internet, but also examine the information yourself, do your own research and use your own mind and consciousness.
There's two things just quickly that I want to ask you about because you referenced hunting. And to be honest, I didn't even bother bringing them up because Jhatka Dheg have been two things that we've been quite familiar with from, fortunately, quite a young age. To those who view those two things as controversial, how would you explain that, or how would you contextualize them in the right context to explain that actually they're not controversial?
A theme of what we've been talking about is how to disarm somebody. And look, arms, traditionally, what they're used for, hunting, as tools, cutting. So, we come from, in history, the oldest races on this planet. We know scientifically that they're hunter-gatherers. So, Guru Gobind Singh was a hunter with Khalsa as his son, and the Guru ordered us at the Amrit Sanchar, you should embrace hunting. So we're not a pacifistic race. We believe in dharam. We believe in fighting for what's right and standing and giving our lives for what's right. And hunting was a part of that education. When you go out into nature, living with nature, camping in nature, in tents, living on horseback, learning what nature is, getting that strength of being able to go through physical hardship. That's what warfare is, physical hardship. You can't endure a few sleepless nights in the cold. You're hardly going to be able to kill an enemy. And likewise, if you can't shoot another animal, it's highly unlikely you're going to be able to shoot another human being to protect yourself even. You'll just because you put your hands up. So the thing is, that's where the whole vegetarian debate comes and everything else. And, we're Kshatris, we're warriors. We're not only Kshatri, of course, we've got the Brahmanic knowledge of the Ved, of Ek Oankar, of Om, of Oang. And we've got the thing of being a servant, of being a trader, was all these forecasts in the Khalsa. But primarily, Guru Gobind Singh left us as warriors with Panj Kakar, male or female, to signify that. And so, we're Singhs, we're hunters, we're not gatherers, we're not rabbits. So let's be Singhs.
Fair. And then in relation to Dheg, how would you contextualize that?
Well, look, let's look at the scientific evidence now, which is massive. Cannabis is good for us. It is good for the health, but we need to here make a little bit of a separation. Modern cannabis is really high in THC, skunk. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the original strains of plants. So don't get this hybridized stuff. The original strain of plant is really good, leads to people's mind getting more peaceful insights, healing ideas. So it's not like drinking alcohol or something like that. It's very insightful if it's the right type of cannabis, like in India. So, and it's a medicine. In Ayurveda, there's 32 diseases that it gets rid of. And we know from the evidence now it helps with memory, increases brain cells, gets rid of inflammation, anti-cancer, antiviral. The list is endless. So why are we messing around? Why can't we just accept science? And why can't we accept where the historians have written that the Gurus took Dheg and the Nahangs took Dheg? We say Dheg, Dheg, Fateh. But the thing is, Dheg is langar, but it's also Shahidi Dheg, the drink of the martyrs. So at the end of the day, we've got the British Hemp Report, 1880 something. The list is endless of how much, Suraj Prakash list goes back into the Guru's own court about the use of cannabis indica. So at the end of the day, that's a part of the tradition, never going to change. And the porg is always going to happen to that. And jira sukha da karda badi oda pio khota ta ma gadi. Sat Sri Akal, Guru Akal, Dheg Dheg Fateh, Har Maidan Fateh.